Imagine this. A billionaire with a war chest big enough to buy small countries decides he can muzzle a member of Congress with a single letter. Not a subpoena, not a court order, a letter. Heavy stock, gold crest, the works. Crafted to sound like the final word. The message between the lines is simple. Back off. Or we bury you in litigation. Now here's the part most people don't realize. If those remarks happened as part of a lawmaker's official work, that letter might as well be written on tissue paper. Because when oversight is happening inside the machinery of Congress, there's a constitutional shield that changes everything. In American law, words don't all live on the same street. A trash talk tweet is one thing, a soundbite on a cable panel is another, but statements made in the course of legislative work, questions in a hearing, statements entered into the record, materials prepared for a committee, are protected in a way that makes most would-be bullies choke on their own bravado. There's a reason for that. The founders didn't want oversight to stop the moment someone rich enough to hire a phalanx of lawyers said, "See you in court." They wanted investigations to run on evidence, not on fear. So ask yourself, if money and megaphones could silence oversight, how many questions would never get asked? How many contracts would never get examined? How many safety problems, pricing games, or conflicts of interest would stay buried because a general counsel fired off a scary PDF? If you care about how your tax dollars move, in peacetime and crisis, in routine buys and emergency no-bid deals, then you care about this shield even if you've never heard its name. And if you've ever watched a viral clip from a hearing and wondered, can they be sued for saying that? This is your episode. Here's our promise to you tonight. We're not doing gossip, and we're not doing hero worship. We're doing receipts. We'll show you how the law draws a bright line between protected legislative acts and everything else. We'll explain why defamation lawsuits almost never touch congressional questioning. We'll show where the line actually lives. Because yes, there are places a lawmaker can step outside the shield and get burned. And we'll do it with real doctrine, real cases, and plain language you can use to fact-check the next billionaire versus Congress blow-up in your feed. Let's start with the power play. The cease-and-desist letter is not really about winning in court. It's about winning the news cycle. It's about a press release that says, these statements are false and defamatory, sent to inboxes with big audiences. It's about a chilling effect, making staffers ask, should we dial this back? It's also about signaling, we have resources. You have a calendar and a microphone. We'll make you regret using both. But the move only works if the target doesn't understand the guardrails. The fastest way to lose a game of chicken with Congress is to pretend the Constitution doesn't exist. Inside a hearing room, a representative's job is to ask hard questions. Emphasis on job, not a hobby, not a social post. A job assigned by the people, under rules set by the House and Senate, enforced by committees empowered to demand documents, take testimony, and publish findings. That's not chaos. That's design. And design comes with protections. The framers built a mechanism so accountability couldn't be blunted by intimidation. And courts have spent decades defending that mechanism with surprising consistency. Translation. If your master plan starts with, let's sue a legislator for what they said in a hearing, you're probably not holding a legal strategy. You're holding a PR stunt with a letterhead, but don't get it twisted. This isn't a blanket permission slip for politicians to say anything, anywhere. The shield is strong, not infinite. Step outside the lane, grandstand in a newsletter, throw elbows in a parking lot presser, blast a thread that rehashes the hearing but isn't part of the official record, and you're back on regular world rules. That's where defamation standards, truth defenses, opinion doctrines, and all the messy parts of public figure law apply. We'll map that line carefully, because understanding it is the difference between credible oversight and careless theatrics. Why does this matter beyond one showdown? Because oversight is where huge, quiet decisions get daylight. Emergency contract modifications, sole source awards, safety waivers, performance penalties. All of that can be perfectly lawful, and sometimes it is. But sometimes shortcuts turn into bad habits, and bad habits turn into expensive or dangerous outcomes. Oversight is the flashlight. Without it, the public sees headlines. With it, the public sees invoices, memos, and accountability. And that's exactly why power tries to turn the flashlight off. So in this first chapter, We're setting the stakes. Billion-dollar contracts, national programs, and the rule that keeps elected officials from being muzzled when they do the job we elected them to do. Across this episode, you'll watch us pull apart the intimidation script piece by piece. We'll translate the legalese. We'll show how urgent and compelling procurement exceptions work and what a legitimate paper trail looks like. We'll break down where tough questioning ends and actionable claim begins. And we'll outline the narrow, high-bar scenarios where a threat to a congressional process could cross into something more serious than bluster. If you're here for drama, you'll get tension. If you're here for truth, you'll get tools. Because the next time you see a familiar sequence, a viral clip, a legal threat, a pile-on, a counter-threat, you won't be stuck choosing between your favorite team and your least favorite mogul. You'll know the rules of the field. You'll be able to ask the only question that matters. Is this part of a protected legislative act, or is it outside the shield? Once you can answer that, the rest starts making sense, so lean in. In a moment, we'll break open the constitutional language that keeps the gears of oversight turning, even when powerful people would rather grind them to a halt. We'll spotlight the exact kinds of acts that are protected, the kinds that aren't, and how courts think about the gray in between. And then we'll climb the ladder from doctrine to dollars, how that legal shield translates into real-world scrutiny of spending, safety, and strategy. This isn't about who you love or hate online. It's about the architecture that protects the questions your money deserves. When congressional spotlights fade, the courtroom lights flick on. What begins as political theater often matures into legal trench warfare, slower, drier, but vastly more dangerous. Here, intimidation tactics don't just backfire in headlines. They generate filings, subpoenas, depositions, and judgments. And unlike social media storms, these don't blow over. They accumulate weight until reputations, contracts, and fortunes shift permanently. The civil arena comes first. Shareholders file derivative suits, arguing that executives breached fiduciary duties by exposing the company to regulatory and reputational damage. Whistleblowers, emboldened by oversight, sue under False Claims Act provisions, seeking treble damages on misused subsidies or padded invoices. Competitors, smelling weakness, launch bid protests or antitrust claims. Civil litigation may sound less dramatic than federal indictments, but the numbers can dwarf criminal fines. Hundreds of millions in settlements, binding compliance monitors, years of discovery. The process becomes punishment, draining executive bandwidth and company coffers alike. Then comes the regulatory front. Inspectors General launch audits. GAO issues reports. SEC probes disclosures to see if investors were misled. IRS reviews tax credit claims. Agencies revisit contract eligibility. Each step multiplies paperwork and deadlines. Each finding creates leverage for further enforcement. Regulators coordinate across jurisdictions. What starts as a Pentagon contract review can spill into commerce, energy, and even European watchdogs. The legal term here is parallel proceedings, but from the inside it feels like a hydra. Cut off one head, two more appear. The criminal side is the sharpest edge. U.S. attorneys convene grand juries. Subpoenas demand emails, text chains, meeting notes. Prosecutors test witness intimidation and obstruction theories. Immunity deals flip insiders into cooperators. Grand jury secrecy cloaks the pace, but leaks and filings signal escalation. Unlike civil suits, criminal probes target individuals, executives, lawyers, staffers. Penalties aren't just fines, but prison terms. The threat shifts from balance sheets to personal liberty. That's when high-profile figures start hiring ex-White House counsel, Watergate veterans, or prosecutors turned defense stars. The move is less about optics than survival. Discovery becomes its own battlefield. Civil plaintiffs demand internal records. Regulators demand production. Defense counsel fights to limit scope. Every email joking about subsidies, every slide deck smoothing over safety gaps, every Slack message mocking oversight. Suddenly, they're exhibits. Attorneys comb terabytes of data not to craft narratives, but to mitigate damage. Each disclosed document sharpens the public story. Oversight had raised questions. Now the documents provide answers, often in the company's own words. The insurance layer can implode too. Directors and officers, D&O insurance policies exclude fraud or intentional misconduct. If intimidation letters or obstruction evidence tip a case into those categories, insurers balk. Suddenly, Legal costs, once assumed to be covered, land directly on the company's balance sheet, or worse, executives' personal assets. That financial whiplash is why boards panic as soon as obstruction enters the vocabulary. Legal fallout also breeds structural reform. Settlements often require compliance monitors, independent watchdogs embedded inside the company with reporting duties to regulators. These aren't token hires. They have authority to demand documents, veto deals, and mandate new processes. For executives who once dismissed oversight as noise, the irony is stark. Now they live with a watchdog at their own boardroom table. Meanwhile, parallel class actions grow in the background. Taxpayers sue to recover subsidies. Consumers sue over safety misrepresentations. Employees sue over retaliation tied to whistleblowing. Each suit draws on the same factual well dug by oversight, but pursues its own damages. The cumulative pressure resembles a siege, one wall breached, then another, until the whole fortress feels untenable. For the individuals involved, the legal landscape is equally relentless. Depositions lock testimony under oath. Contradictions between public statements and sworn answers become perjury risks. Travel restrictions, asset freezes, and bail hearings loom for those in criminal jeopardy. The swagger of, "We'll fight this," melts under the grind of weekly meetings with defense counsel and hourly rates measured in thousands. And yet, this legal battlefield serves a purpose beyond punishment. It enforces the principle that intimidation of oversight isn't just a bad look. It's actionable misconduct with cascading consequences. Courts, unlike Congress, don't trade in rhetoric. They trade in evidence and binding rulings. The transformation from viral moment to courtroom saga underscores the through line. Attempts to silence oversight amplify accountability instead. In the next section, we'll step back to the historical lens, how past giants, from Wall Street titans to defense contractors, face similar spirals, and why the cycle of overreach, exposure, and reckoning repeats. Because the lesson here isn't just about one mogul or one committee, it's about a pattern baked into democracy itself. When unchecked power leans too hard, the system eventually leans back. History has a way of rhyming, especially when it comes to power colliding with oversight. The names change: rail barons, oil magnates, defense contractors, tech giants, but the pattern repeats: unchecked confidence, aggressive pushback, exposure, and reckoning. Looking backward gives clarity to what's happening now, because it shows that intimidation tactics have always had an expiration date. Take the Gilded Age tycoons. Railroad bosses and steel kings routinely used legal threats to silence journalists and politicians who questioned subsidies and monopolistic contracts. Some even paid for smear campaigns in newspapers. For a while it worked, until oversight committees dragged contracts and receipts into daylight. The backlash produced landmark reforms like the Interstate Commerce Act and the Sherman Antitrust Act. What seemed untouchable in the 1880s was being prosecuted by the 1890s. Fast forward to the mid-20th century defense industry. Military contractors leaned heavily on their indispensability, arguing that oversight endangered national security. When senators asked tough questions, contractors threatened to withdraw jobs or cancel facilities. But hearings in the 1940s and 1950s revealed price inflation, cost overruns, and even falsified test data. The fallout created the permanent subcommittee structure and birthed watchdogs like the Government Accountability Office with sharper teeth. Intimidation hadn't stifled oversight. It had triggered its institutionalization. Consider Watergate-era abuses. The Nixon White House tried to intimidate oversight through executive privilege claims, stonewalling subpoenas, and legal threats against leakers. Instead, the attempt to muzzle oversight created a backlash so strong it redefined the balance of power between Congress and the presidency. The lesson wasn't subtle. Even the most powerful office in the world couldn't bulldoze congressional inquiry without consequences. Jump to the Enron scandal of the early 2000s. Executives used armies of lawyers and PR firms to cast congressional questions as political witch hunts. They leaned on donations, lobbyists, and media surrogates to paint themselves as victims of overregulation. Then the documents came out: off-balance sheet fraud, shredded files, manipulated energy markets. Once again, intimidation had delayed but not prevented exposure. The result was Sarbanes-Oxley, a law that reshaped corporate accountability for an entire generation. The financial crisis of 2008 echoed the same rhythm. Banks and insurers pushed back hard against early oversight signals, dismissing them as partisan attacks. But as hearings exposed risky derivatives and hidden liabilities, intimidation gave way to subpoenas. The fallout led to Dodd-Frank stress tests and a permanent watchdog in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The lesson repeated. What looks like invulnerability in one decade becomes regulation in the next. Even in the tech sector, the cycle is visible. Early internet giants brushed off privacy oversight, deploying lobbyists and legal muscle to stall scrutiny. When whistleblowers and oversight hearings revealed surveillance abuses and data misuse, the regulatory tide turned. Today, hearings on antitrust, privacy, and AI echo those earlier confrontations. Companies that once seemed able to dictate terms now face breakup chatter and multi-billion-dollar fines abroad. The historical through-line is blunt. Intimidation works in the short term, but backfires in the long term. Each attempt to bully oversight hardens the system against it, producing more transparency, tougher laws, and stronger watchdogs. What begins as a battle between one powerful figure and one committee often ends as a precedent reshaping entire industries. It's also worth noting the cultural arc. Every generation needs its public reminder that no one is above accountability. The robber barons taught it through antitrust. The defense scandals taught it through procurement reform. Watergate taught it through checks and balances. Enron taught it through corporate governance. The financial crisis taught it through systemic regulation. Today's battles will likely teach it through tech accountability and government contracting reforms. The specifics change, the core lesson doesn't. This continuity matters because it strips away the illusion of novelty. A billionaire with an army of lawyers trying to intimidate a congresswoman isn't a unique drama. It's another verse in an old American song. The characters are modern, but the script is familiar. That familiarity is both humbling and reassuring. Humbling because overreach keeps recurring. Reassuring because the system keeps finding ways to correct it. In the next and final section, we'll pull the lens all the way back. We'll ask what these recurring showdowns reveal about the architecture of democracy itself, why oversight, though messy and slow, remains the one tool that consistently brings power to heel. And we'll close with the core truth that history, markets, and law all converge to teach. In the long run, intimidation doesn't silence accountability. It amplifies it. Pull the lens all the way back and the pattern sharpens into a principle. Democratic oversight is slow, noisy, and imperfect, but it endures. Intimidation, whether by wealth, celebrity, or armies of lawyers, burns fast and then collapses under its own weight. That collapse isn't accidental. It's built into the architecture of checks and balances. The final lesson of every showdown is the same. No one, not even the richest or loudest, sits above accountability for long. At its core, oversight is a constitutional function, not a political hobby. The speech or debate clause wasn't written to shield witty sound bites. It was drafted to guarantee that legislators could probe, question, and challenge without fear of reprisal from kings, presidents, or magnates. When a member presses a contractor about subsidies or safety lapses, they're not freelancing. They're exercising one of the oldest duties of representative government, guarding the purse and protecting the public. Attempts to intimidate that function don't just insult an individual. They attack the foundation of democratic legitimacy. The system's resilience comes from its redundancies. Oversight doesn't live or die on one committee hearing. It's mirrored in Inspector General audits, GAO reviews, whistleblower statutes, judicial enforcement of subpoenas, and even state-level investigations. An intimidation letter might freeze one moment, but the process has too many nodes to kill. The redundancy is deliberate. Democracy doesn't trust any single actor with exclusive guardianship. That's why, decade after decade, scandals escape suppression and force reforms, whether in railroads, defense contracts, banking, or tech. But resilience doesn't mean inevitability. Oversight only works if individuals choose to use it. A congresswoman asking sharp questions, a staffer drafting precise follow-ups, a lawyer crafting a disciplined response. Those acts sustain the architecture. Without them, intimidation wins by default. That's why courage in these moments matters. It isn't just personal bravery. It's systemic maintenance. When public servants refuse to be silenced, they're not just defending their reputations. They're lubricating the gears of accountability for everyone. The irony of intimidation is that it accelerates scrutiny. A quiet oversight letter might have triggered modest document production. Add an aggressive cease and desist, and suddenly the story goes national. Threats designed to suppress questions often multiply them, drawing more reporters, more regulators, more committees. What was once a manageable oversight cycle snowballs into criminal inquiries and international scrutiny. The attempt to demonstrate strength exposes weakness. The civic payoff extends beyond one mogul or one hearing. Each time oversight survives intimidation, the public sees proof that money and influence can't erase accountability. That visibility matters. It restores trust in institutions, inspires whistleblowers to step forward, and deters future overreach. It also reminds voters that elections don't just pick policy. They pick guardians of scrutiny. When you elect people willing to face intimidation head-on, you invest in a democracy that can police itself. In the long view, intimidation attempts become case studies. Law schools teach the response letters. Political science classes dissect the hearings. Business schools warn executives about the cost of hubris. What looks like a skirmish in the moment becomes curriculum for a generation. The cycle doesn't just correct behavior, it educates. The final truth is deceptively simple. Accountability wins because it compounds. Every clawback reinforces the norm that contracts must be clean. Every penalty reinforces the norm that subsidies must be earned. Every prosecution reinforces the norm that oversight must be respected. These wins don't erase misconduct, but they raise the cost of repeating it. Over time, the system gets harder to game, not easier. So what does this showdown ultimately teach? That intimidation is brittle. That oversight, messy as it is, bends but doesn't break. That courage from a single public servant can trigger systemic reform. That the Constitution still has sharper teeth than any legal threat if its tools are wielded. And that's the enduring American promise. Wealth can buy influence, armies of lawyers, even temporary silence, but it cannot buy exemption from democratic accountability. Oversight ensures that even the loudest voice eventually has to answer to the quiet weight of facts. That is the conclusion of this saga, and the reminder for every viewer. The next time you see a billionaire flex against a questioner, don't measure the clash by volume. Measure it by durability. Because history, markets, law, and democracy all say the same thing: intimidation fades. Oversight remains. Picture a locked door between raw political power and the people's right to ask hard questions. Now picture a key that only turns when a lawmaker is doing their job for real. Not grandstanding, not freelancing, but engaging in the gritty work of making and overseeing laws. That key is the speech or debate clause. It's older than any billionaire brand, tougher than any cease and desist. And it exists for one reason: to make sure representatives can investigate, deliberate, and speak inside the legislative process without looking over their shoulders for a subpoena. No drama, no loopholes, just a structural guarantee that the people's questions get asked, even when the answers make powerful folks uncomfortable. Here's the plain English version. When a member of Congress is performing a legislative act, courts back off. That phrase, legislative act, sounds abstract, but it's surprisingly concrete. Think of questioning a witness in a committee hearing, introducing material into the official record, circulating a memo to colleagues to prepare lines of inquiry, drafting a report, issuing a subpoena, voting on a resolution to compel testimony. These aren't side gigs. They're the core of congressional work. Shielding that core means the gears of oversight turn even when money and influence try to jam the machine. If you've ever watched a hearing clip and wondered, can they be sued for saying that? The answer, when the remark is part of the hearing itself, is almost always no. Not no because they were polite. Not no because their lawyers are scary. No because the Constitution says so. The courts didn't invent this to be cute or partisan. They recognized an obvious problem. If anyone with resources could drag lawmakers into court every time a tough question landed, hearings would stop. Staffers would water down memos. Subpoenas would collect dust. The public would get theater, not truth. The clause slams that door shut. But protection isn't permission to freestyle. The shield follows the work, not the person. Inside the legislative lane, it's ironclad. Step outside and you're on regular pavement. That means the exact same sentence might be protected at 10:02 a.m. when it's asked in a hearing. but not protected at 3:45 p.m. if it's rephrased for a campaign newsletter, or shouted to cameras on the Capitol steps, or blasted into a thread that isn't part of any official proceeding. The content might be identical. The context is everything. Courts don't chase personalities. They trace process. If the act is integral to legislating or overseeing, the shield holds. If it's post-game commentary or media spin, the shield steps back. Here's a useful mental checklist. Ask 3 questions. 1. Who is speaking? A sitting member or staffer acting on the member's behalf can be covered. 2. Where is it happening? On the House or Senate floor, in a committee room, or in activities essential to that proceeding. 3. Why is it being said? Is this driving the legislative process, building a record, requesting information, or voting to move an inquiry forward? If you get yes across those boxes, the clause is doing work. If the answers pull you toward press strategy, public relations, or campaign activity, you're drifting outside the privilege. That boundary gets clearer with examples. A pointed question during sworn testimony? Covered. A follow-up letter from the committee chair requesting documents tied to that testimony? Covered. A staff brief analyzing what those documents might show and suggesting additional witnesses? Covered. Now contrast that with an op-ed the member writes for a national outlet summarizing what we learned today, often not covered. A cable appearance the night of the hearing, replaying the spiciest sound bites, likely not covered. A fundraising email with a clip and a vow to keep up the fight, definitely not covered. Same topic, different lane. Notice what this architecture does to intimidation tactics. A threatening letter that misreads the landscape may sound loud, but it's aimed at the wrong target. Inside the legislative zone, the clause doesn't merely create a defense. It strips the court of power to even hear the case. Translation: you can spend a fortune to file, but the door you're knocking on may not legally open. That's why sophisticated counsel on the receiving end of saber-rattling tend to respond with calm, precise sentences that start with the jurisdictional problem before they touch anything else. If a threat tries to erase oversight's immunity, the first move is simple. Point to the key and show the lock. At the same time, the clause isn't a license for carelessness. Serious lawmakers respect the privilege by keeping their investigative record tight. They ground questions in staff research. They avoid slipping into personal smears that aren't tethered to oversight needs. They distinguish between what they can responsibly say inside the process and what they choose to say outside it. That discipline doesn't weaken their punch, it concentrates it. When the public sees a member staying in the lane, sticking to documents and pressing with precision, 2 things happen. The shield is strongest, and the facts are sharpest. There's another layer here that professionals know and bullies tend to forget. The clause protects functions, not only words. That means the issuing of subpoenas, the gathering of materials, the drafting of reports. These aren't side effects. They are the core. Try to claw at those with litigation and you run into the same brick wall. It's why committees can call reluctant witnesses, demand contracts, and publish findings without worrying that every paragraph will spawn a lawsuit. The system was designed to create a safe channel for truth to travel from witnesses and records to the public record. Now you might ask, what about when a member seems to go too far even inside a hearing? There's a safety valve for that too, and it doesn't involve outside courts. It's internal discipline, rules of decorum, committee leadership, parliamentary procedures, ethics review. Those levers exist so Congress can police its own processes without ceding the power of oversight to anyone with a high-priced letterhead. If a lawmaker abuses their mic, their colleagues, chairs, and rules can correct it. The public can correct it at the ballot box. But the courtroom is not the referee for protected acts. This is all high principle. So let's bring it down to stakes. Why anchor this much protection to hearings and legislative work? Because big decisions hide inside boring paperwork. Contract modifications, waiver requests, performance audits, safety deviations. If those can't be questioned vigorously and publicly, the watchdog goes blind. The clause ensures that when a member asks, "Why did this agency fast-track that vendor?" the question gets an answer on the record, not a threat in the mail. It ensures that when a witness dodges, the committee can press. And it ensures that when documents tell a different story than press releases, the documents win. Here's the bottom line for anyone tempted to test the shield. If your plan is to chill oversight by dangling litigation over a protected act, you're swinging at smoke. The fastest way to change the narrative is not to muzzle the microphone. It's to produce facts that hold up under questioning. The clause doesn't pick sides. It picks process. It says, bring evidence, not intimidation. Answer questions. Don't threaten the right to ask them. If you're confident in your contracts, your safety record, your performance data, and your disclosures, hearings become your chance to prove it. If you're not, well, that's exactly why the flashlight exists. Close your eyes and imagine a courtroom where truth itself is on trial. One side waves a thick packet of accusations, saying a lawmaker's words were poisonous. The other side leans back and says, not so fast. Those words were oversight. Now swap out the courtroom for a hearing room, and you've got the heart of the defamation debate when it comes to Congress. Everyone online loves to say, that's defamatory. But the law has a far higher bar, especially when the target of the speech is a public figure and the speaker is an elected official. So let's build the foundation. Defamation means publishing a false statement of fact that damages someone's reputation. Not an opinion, not an insult, not a sharp question. An assertion of fact that can be proven true or false and proven false in court. And when the person suing is a public figure, a billionaire CEO, a cabinet secretary, even a celebrity, the hurdle jumps even higher. They have to prove actual malice. That doesn't mean spite. It means the speaker knew the statement was false or recklessly disregarded obvious evidence it wasn't true. That's not easy to show. Courts built this high wall on purpose to protect robust debate in a democracy. Now drop this framework into a congressional hearing. If a member says your company took shortcuts in its safety testing, the first question isn't, was that polite? It's, was that said as part of a legislative act? If yes, the speech or debate clause locks the door on any defamation claim right there. Even if the statement stings, even if the audience gasps, it's protected as official oversight. That's why most lawyers who understand this terrain don't seriously threaten lawsuits over hearing room remarks. The legal odds aren't just long, they're nearly impossible. But let's shift the setting. Take that same remark, strip it out of the hearing, and paste it into a press release, or drop it into a cable news hit, or fire it off as a tweet. Suddenly the shield doesn't stretch as far. The member is still a public official, still speaking on public business, but now they're playing by the same First Amendment rules as everyone else. That means defamation law kicks in. False statement of fact, actual malice, reputational harm. The battlefield changes. It's rare, but not impossible, for lawsuits to emerge from those contexts. The critical difference is the forum, official proceeding versus outside commentary. And here's where truth comes roaring back into play. The ultimate defense to defamation isn't technical privilege, it's proof. If the statement is substantially true, there's no defamation case to make. That's why sharp lawyers, when responding to legal threats, sometimes welcome discovery. They know that proving the truth of a claim doesn't just defeat the lawsuit, it flips the spotlight onto the accuser's conduct. And if you've ever wondered why some threats fizzle out instead of being filed, it's often because the risk of exposure outweighs the thrill of intimidation. But wait, there's another shield: opinion. The Supreme Court has made clear that pure opinion, rhetorical hyperbole, or questions that don't assert verifiable facts usually don't qualify as defamatory. "This is corruption" can often be seen as rhetoric. This company filed false safety certifications on April 14th is factual and provable. Oversight questions live right on that line, probing, sharp, but tethered to facts the committee is entitled to explore. That's why context is everything. Lawmakers who stick close to documents, records, and legitimate questions stay on solid ground. For audiences, here's the key takeaway. A lawsuit threat isn't proof of liability. It's a move in a bigger game. Sometimes it's about public perception, sometimes it's about rattling an opponent, sometimes it's about buying time. The real test is whether the statements fall under protected legislative acts, whether they're opinions or factual assertions, and whether the speaker had a solid foundation for saying them. When those conditions are met, the word defamation is more bluster than bombshell. Think about it this way. If every sharp question could trigger damages, the chill would be instant. No lawmaker would risk grilling a CEO about subsidies, safety, or influence. Oversight would collapse under fear of litigation. That's exactly what the founders wanted to prevent, which is why the constitutional shield is so robust. The price of democracy is tolerating some hard questions, even some unfair ones, in the service of truth. Follow the money and you'll find the pressure points. Government procurement isn't a smooth highway. It's a maze with emergency exits, fast lanes, and merge points that can move billions with a single signature. The most misunderstood of these is the emergency modification, a legally permissible detour that lets agencies change scope, price, or schedule without starting a whole new competition. Used right, it saves lives and time. Used sloppily, it becomes the shortcut everyone pretends not to see. If you want to understand why oversight questions get sharp, start here. Let's translate the jargon. A contract modification is an official change to an existing deal. It can add funds, tweak requirements, accelerate delivery, or reshape deliverables. In normal conditions, agencies plan these moves months ahead with forecasts, risk reviews, and performance data. But reality doesn't wait for paperwork. War breaks out. A hurricane hits. A launch window opens and then shuts. A cyber exploit spreads overnight. That's where urgent and compelling authority comes in. Procurement rules that say, in effect, you can act now and justify promptly. The intent is sound. Don't let red tape cost lives or strategic opportunities. But emergency speed has a price. It compresses daylight. When competition is bypassed or shortened, you trade comparison shopping for tactical responsiveness.
That's not automatically bad, but it is automatically risky.
The line between legitimate urgency and convenient urgency is thin, and it shifts under political, operational, and commercial pressure. That's why congressional committees zoom in on the paper trail around emergency mods. They're not asking, why were you fast? They're asking, were you fast for the right reasons, with the right controls, at the right cost? Picture the ideal scenario. A mission-critical system is failing in the field. The incumbent contractor can ship a fix in weeks because they already own the tooling, the IP, and the workforce. Competing that work from scratch would take 8 months. The agency issues a justified modification, scope defined, pricing tied to verifiable cost data, milestones locked, performance incentives aligned, audit rights preserved. The Inspector General is briefed, the justification is documented, and watchdogs can trace every decision later. That's the emergency lane working as designed. Now picture the messy version. The justification file leans on generic boilerplate. The price increase appears as a single round number with market pressures cited but not substantiated. Schedule slips are papered over with risk, while acceptance criteria, how the agency proves it got what it paid for, are fuzzy. The same vendor that missed earlier milestones is now receiving more money to fix problems the original contract was supposed to anticipate. Some emails mention political calls. Performance penalties are quietly waived to maintain vendor relationship. That's where oversight dials up the questions. Here's a simple framework anyone can use to evaluate an emergency mod without touching classified details. First necessity. What changed in the environment that made delay unacceptable? Can the agency show contemporaneous evidence, a failure report, a mission deadline, a public emergency declaration? Vague urgency is a red flag. Second, alternatives. Did the agency examine other options, including partial competition, second source providers, or interim bridging solutions? Only one capable source should come with a robust technical and timeline analysis, not just a vendor assertion. Third, price integrity. Is the change priced with verifiable cost or historical data? Are escalation factors explained? Are profit rates consistent with policy? If the price looks like a round number wish rather than a build-up, assume someone is hiding the math. Fourth, performance clarity. What exactly will be delivered? By when? With what testable acceptance criteria? If acceptance is agency discretion, that's soft ground for schedule drift and scope creep. Fifth, accountability. Are prior performance issues noted and mitigated? Are remedies, like withholds, liquidated damages, or incentive fees, structured to reward success rather than excuse delay? A mod that rewards the same behavior that caused the problem is an invitation to repeat it. Sixth, transparency. Was the justification summarized for public release when appropriate? Were required notifications made to oversight bodies? Silence where disclosure is customary should wake you up more than shouting ever could. Critics sometimes argue, speed and scrutiny don't mix. Wrong. Speed and discipline mix. The best emergency mods read like battlefield checklists, short, concrete, accountable. You'll see crisp justifications, clear deliverables, measurable outcomes, and built-in verification. You know what you bought and how you'll know you got it. Sloppy mods read like vibes, and vibes don't deliver capability. This is where the politics of procurement collide with the mechanics. Big, visible vendors often sit at the center of national missions. They build rockets, satellites, networks, vehicles. When a crisis hits, they're at the table, and that's fine. The system expects incumbents to be first responders for their own systems. But incumbency can turn into entitlement if no one asks hard questions. We're already on contract becomes we're the only option. We can move faster becomes don't ask for details. Oversight exists to break those rhetorical spells and force the facts onto the record. What about safety? In high-risk domains, launch operations, advanced manufacturing, critical infrastructure, safety and schedule wrestle constantly. An emergency mod that accelerates delivery by thinning safety gates is not a bargain. It's a bet against physics. If an agency downgrades test requirements or waives inspections, it should be able to explain precisely what redundant mitigations took their place. Trust us is not a mitigation. It's a marketing slogan. Watch for language like streamlined verification, and then look for the substitute controls. If you can't find them, neither can the risk. Another pressure point is scope creep disguised as urgency. A crisis triggers a legitimate mod, but the change also smuggles in wishlist items, extra features, speculative R&D, unrelated upgrades. The mod grows from a fix to a buffet. Agencies sometimes do this to avoid multiple procurement actions under time pressure. Vendors sometimes do it to capture budget while the window is open. Oversight's job is to separate the fire from the freeloaders, approve what's essential, defer what's opportunistic. Pricing deserves its own spotlight. There's a myth that emergency equals blank check. It doesn't. The same cost principles apply. The time box is tighter. Agencies can demand cost or pricing data, use rate agreements, benchmark against prior buys, or structure incentive fees to pay for performance rather than promises. If you see an emergency mod with a huge upfront payment and backloaded accountability, someone prioritized cash flow over outcomes. Flip it. Put more money at the back end after deliverables are verified. You'll be shocked how performance improves when checks clear on proof, not projections. Let's talk about documentation, the oxygen of oversight. Good emergency files tell a story anyone can follow 6 months later. What happened, why the option was chosen, who signed, how performance will be measured, when auditors will look. Bad files look like a scavenger hunt, missing memos, undated drafts, signatures without titles, redactions hiding decisions instead of sensitive methods. When the record is a mess, it's not just inconvenient. It's a sign that the process was either rushed beyond reason or designed to be untraceable. Either way, scrutiny is not only appropriate, it's overdue. Here's the uncomfortable truth for both sides. Agencies fear being second-guessed for taking action. Vendors fear being second-guessed for charging real costs under pressure. Fine. The answer isn't to skip oversight. It's to embrace measurable commitments. If it's truly urgent, the record will show urgency. If it's truly sole source, the record will show technical uniqueness under timelines that matter. If the price is truly fair, the build-up will withstand an audit. Oversight doesn't punish necessity. It punishes laziness and opportunism masquerading as necessity. In a minute, we'll step from process into consequences. When hardball responses to oversight, threat letters, pressure campaigns, lawyer up or shut up, risk crossing a very different legal line. Because while emergency procurement can justify speed, nothing justifies trying to intimidate a congressional proceeding. That's where statutes about obstruction and tampering live, and that's where a miscalculated flex can turn into a long, cold legal winter. For now, remember the procurement takeaway. Urgency is not a loophole. It's a lane with guardrails, mile markers, and cameras. If you're driving it, expect someone to check the dash cam. Think of intimidation as a shadow game. Most of the time, it's noise. A stern letter, a viral post, a barrage of talking points meant to spook the target into silence. But sometimes that noise drifts into a zone the law actually cares about. Criminal statutes designed to protect investigations. When the target is a congressional proceeding, the stakes get even higher. Suddenly, the words obstruction and witness tampering stop sounding like hypotheticals and start looking like real risk. Let's start with the basics. Federal law has two workhorses in this area: 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1505, and 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1512. Section 1505 makes it a crime to obstruct, influence, or impede the due and proper exercise of the power of inquiry by Congress. Translation: if a committee is gathering information, and someone corruptly interferes, say, by destroying documents, coaching witnesses to lie, or using threats to shut down questioning, that's obstruction. Section 1512, on the other hand, covers witness tampering. It prohibits intimidating, threatening, or corruptly persuading another person to withhold testimony, avoid documents, or otherwise derail an official proceeding. It even includes harassment that doesn't rise to physical threat but still pressures a witness away from truth-telling. Notice the overlap. Both statutes are about protecting process. They don't require a gavel-to-gavel trial or even a courtroom. A House committee hearing, a Senate inquiry, an investigation run by a standing subcommittee, all of those count. The law doesn't wait until you're under oath in a courthouse. It kicks in the moment Congress is doing its job. That's why aggressive letters to Hill offices are so carefully read. A routine. We disagree with your statements is one thing. A veiled, if you keep talking, we'll make you pay, can look very different under the statute. But here's the critical nuance. Not every heated exchange qualifies. Courts look for intent. Did the sender mean to corruptly interfere with a proceeding, or were they just venting? Was the communication tied directly to a witness's participation, or a committee's inquiry, or was it just noise in the political ether? The line is high for a reason. Free speech and political combat can't be criminalized just because they're loud. But the line exists for a reason too. If power uses legal threats to strangle oversight itself, the law has to step in. Think about three scenarios. First, a lawyer sends a letter to a member of Congress arguing that their statements were defamatory and demanding a correction. That's bluster, maybe even strategic PR, but not necessarily obstruction. Second, the letter explicitly warns, if you keep asking these questions in hearings, we'll bankrupt you. Now we're in danger territory, because that ties directly to an official act. Third, behind the scenes, the same team pressures potential whistleblowers to stay quiet, reminding them of non-disclosure agreements and hinting at lawsuits if they testify. That's textbook witness tampering. The conduct moves from defending reputation into undermining a proceeding. Oversight staff know this terrain well. That's why they document phone logs, voicemail recordings, emails, social media campaigns. All of it becomes evidence of intent. When harassment floods in, committees don't just endure, they preserve. If a pattern looks coordinated, if the timing tracks subpoenas, if the pressure maps onto specific testimony, those breadcrumbs lead straight into statutory language. The more you try to make oversight disappear, the more paper trail you leave showing why oversight is necessary. One often overlooked subsection of paragraph 1512 covers harassment that causes a witness to skip testimony. It doesn't require physical threats. Sustained intimidation that makes someone reasonably fear consequences can qualify. That's why online swarms, call floods, or coordinated name and shame campaigns aimed at chilling testimony aren't just bad optics. Depending on how they're orchestrated and linked to a proceeding, they could be evidence of tampering. The modern battlefield isn't just the letterhead, it's the feed, the trending hashtag, the inbox full of scripted messages. Another wrinkle, conspiracy liability. If multiple actors agree to obstruct and take steps toward that goal, everyone in the circle can be charged, even if only one sends the letter or makes the call. That means outside lawyers, corporate executives, consultants, even friendly influencers could find themselves inside the net if prosecutors see a coordinated effort to silence or intimidate. What looks like an aggressive PR campaign can morph into evidence of a corrupt agreement if it's tied back to congressional activity. To be clear, these statutes aren't triggered by every bit of saber rattling. Congress is used to harsh words. But when the strategy shifts from defend our position to shut down your oversight, the law has sharp teeth. And history shows those teeth have been used on lobbyists who shredded files, on executives who leaned on witnesses, even on government officials who tried to strong-arm inquiries. The penalties aren't slap-on-the-wrist fines. We're talking felonies, prison time, career-ending stigma. The real takeaway for viewers is simple. Congressional oversight isn't just politics. It's a protected process with legal guardrails. Intimidation that might work in other arenas, pressuring reporters, leaning on critics, flooding social media, can turn into criminal evidence when aimed at a committee. That's why the smartest play is always transparency. Answer the questions, provide the documents, defend the record with facts. Anything else risks moving from a PR battle into a criminal investigation. Up next, we'll shift gears from statutes to headlines. How viral clips and clickbait narratives can blur the line between perception and reality. Because while the law draws sharp distinctions, protected act versus outside commentary, oversight versus obstruction, the internet often doesn't. We'll unpack what really happened in the clips you've seen, what didn't happen despite the hype, and why separating fact from spectacle is crucial if you want to understand the battles between lawmakers and billionaires. Think about the last time a clip yanked you out of your scroll. 10 seconds of fireworks, a lawmaker's mic hot, a CEO's eyebrow twitch, a headline screaming exposed. Your pulse jumps. The takes are already forming in your mind. Here's the problem. Viral moments compress a day's worth of nuance into a snack, then dare you to swallow it whole. Oversight doesn't live in snacks. It lives in documents, timelines, transcripts, and statutes. If you want to know what actually happened, you have to pry open the clip and pour out the context it squeezed out. Start with the mechanics of virality. The platforms reward novelty, emotion, and conflict, three ingredients that oversight naturally supplies in tiny samples. But the algorithm has no incentive to tell you whether a zinger came during protected questioning or after the hearing on a cable hit. Whether a bombshell claim was a rhetorical flourish or a finding supported by exhibits. Whether a cease-and-desist was a standard PR feint or something tied to a specific proceeding. The thumbnails shout proof. The details whisper maybe. If you mistake volume for validity, the loudest post wins your attention and your certainty. Facts optional. So here's your field kit for separating sizzle from substance. 1. Locate the forum. Was the statement inside a hearing, in written questions for the record, in an official letter from a committee, or in a press conference and social post afterward? That single distinction changes the legal world around the words. Inside the process, we're talking speech or debate clause territory. Strong armor for the act of oversight. Outside, we're back in the general First Amendment landscape. Fewer shields, more ordinary rules. Clips rarely label this clearly. You have to check the source video description, the chyron, the timestamp, or the congressional website archive. 2. Find the paper. Viral edits rarely show exhibits, but real oversight runs on receipts, contracts, memos, performance reports, Inspector General findings, GAO audits, sworn declarations, emails. If a video claims this proves fraud, your next question is, where's the exhibit? And your next click should be the committee's document repository or hearing packet, not an influencer thread summarizing it. If the document exists, it will have dates, signers, and context that tell a more precise story than the clip can carry. If it doesn't, then what you're watching is an argument, not evidence. 3. Freeze the timeline. Outrage scrambles chronology for dramatic effect. Oversight cares about sequence. When the contract was modified, when the failure report landed, when the agency invoked urgency, when the letter was sent, when the hearing occurred. A single day's shuffle can make a fair question look like a hit job or a legitimate defense look like a dodge. Build yourself a simple ladder. Event A, document B, statement C, reaction D. If you can't stack the rungs in order, you don't really know what happened yet. 4. Classify the claim. Is it an allegation? We're concerned this happened. An inference. These numbers suggest a pattern. A conclusion, we find that X violated Y. Or a rhetorical jab, this smells like corruption. These live on different shelves. Allegations demand investigation. Inferences demand alternative explanations. Conclusions demand citations. Rhetoric demands nothing but an awareness that you're hearing opinion. Viral formats mash these together. Your job is to untangle them and hold each to its standard. 5. Watch for the edit. Oversight exchanges can be surgical. a question set up by 3 prior answers, a reveal that only lands because of an earlier admission, a document flashed on screen and then entered into the record. Short clips often cut the scaffolding. If you see the third question without the first 2, you're missing the architecture that shows why the question matters. Go back, watch the exchange in full. 10 minutes of context can flip your interpretation 180 degrees. 6. Look for the off-ramp. After a viral blow-up, one side will often offer a detailed follow-up, sometimes boring, sometimes devastating. Agencies issue timeline memos. Companies publish fact sheets. Committees release staff reports with supporting exhibits. The off-ramp is where posture meets proof. If one side produces line-item data, citations, and testable claims, while the other produces adjectives and vibes, that asymmetry is telling. Now let's reverse engineer a typical narrative cycle. A hearing produces a dramatic soundbite. Within an hour, posts extract the spiciest 7 seconds. Within a day, commentary channels build episodes around that moment, adding confident narration, graphics, and a title you can't ignore. Somewhere in there, a letter surfaces, maybe a lawyer's threat, maybe a committee's document request. And it becomes the plot twist. The mogul strikes back. The member won't be silenced. The stakes explode. But while the storyline escalates, the legal posture may not have changed at all. Inside the hearing, the privilege still applies. Outside, defamation standards still apply, and none of that is decided by a thumbnail or a trending tag. A second pattern, the hidden document, reveal that isn't. A video shows a screenshot of an email with juicy lines highlighted. The implication is that this is newly unearthed proof. Often those pages were already in a public docket, an Inspector General appendix, or an earlier hearing binder. They're not new. They're newly packaged. That doesn't make them false, but it changes the claim from exposed to amplified. Ask where the doc came from, who authenticated it, and how it fits with the rest of the record. Single emails rarely carry the whole story. Chains, attachments, and approval stamps do. Third pattern, the silence equals guilt, beat. A company or agency goes quiet after a blow-up. The internet reads that as capitulation. Inside real processes, silence often means counsel told everyone to stop freelancing while they gather facts, coordinate disclosures, and avoid contaminating a potential investigation. Silence can be strategy, not surrender. Conversely, a flurry of public denials can signal confidence or panic. The only reliable tell is evidence. This is why journalists who cover oversight obsess over source tiering. Primary sources, statutes, contracts, official letters, sworn testimony, agency records. Secondary, reputable reporting that cites primaries. Tertiary, commentary, summaries, hot takes. Each step down the ladder adds interpretation and removes detail. Watching a tertiary take about a secondary article about a primary document is like photocopying a photocopy. The edges blur. Wherever possible, leap back to the top of the ladder before you decide what to believe. And remember, your own incentives are part of the system. Outrage feels good. Certainty feels safe. But if you're watching a channel that promises explosive truth twice a day, your skepticism should go up, not down. Real oversight wins are slow wins, a methodical paper trail, a corrective contract action, a revised safety protocol, a clawback that returns funds months later. Those outcomes are less clickable than the 7-second spar, but they're what your tax dollars need. Here's the empowering part. You don't need a law degree or a Hill badge to be a smart oversight viewer. You need habits. Pause before sharing. Hunt the source. Check the forum. Build the timeline. Classify the claim. Watch the full exchange. Follow the off-ramp. If that sounds like work, that's because democracy is work, and media literacy is part of the job. The payoff is real. You stop being played by thumbnails and start reading the field like a pro. In our next chapter, we'll turn those habits into a playbook for Hill officers under fire. What a disciplined, privilege-aware response looks like when a threat letter arrives, how to defend the process without feeding the spectacle, and how to communicate with the public in a way that preserves the legal shield while maximizing transparency. Because the best counter to intimidation isn't a louder post, it's a cleaner record. And the best way to win a narrative war is to build a story facts can carry across the finish line. A threat letter lands on a Hill desk with a thud. The instinct is to clap back, to post the takedown before lunch. Don't. The first win here is discipline, not decibels. When counsel opens that envelope, the office shifts from politics to procedure. The job isn't to outscream the sender. It's to protect the investigation, the privilege, and the record so cleanly that the intimidation attempt boomerangs on its own. Step 1 is intake and triage. Log the letter. Scan it to a secure drive. Note sender, recipients, date, and any deadlines. Route a copy to the member's chief, committee counsel, if applicable, and the House or Senate General Counsel. If the letter references specific statements or exhibits from a hearing, pull the transcript and clip the relevant timestamps. Create a folder labeled with the date and matter name. Everything goes there. Emails, calls, press queries, social posts. From the moment the threat arrives, you are building a file that may later read like a case study in how to handle pressure. Step 2 is privilege mapping. Sit down with counsel and classify every challenge statement by forum. A. Inside the proceeding acts. Hearing questions. Statements for the record. Staff-prepared briefing memos. B. Quasi-official acts. Committee letters, document requests, deposition outlines. And C. External commentary. Presses, tweets, op-eds, campaign emails. Color-coded if you must. Category A is the core of the speech or debate clause, a brick wall against private lawsuits over those acts. Category B typically sits close to that core. Category C does not. This map dictates tone, content, and risk in any response. Step 3 is the facts matrix. The letter likely asserts false and defamatory statements. Do not argue adjectives. Lineup claim, source, status. For each contested point, cite what supports the member's questioning. Contract language, Inspector General memos, agency emails, GAO findings, sworn testimony, vendor filings, performance metrics. Mark each source as public, committee confidential, or sensitive. Where a point is rhetorical opinion, this looks like a sweetheart deal. Tag it as such. Where a point is factual, the mod added X on Y date. Tag the proof. The matrix clarifies two things, what's protected by privilege and what's true. Step 4, preservation and holds. Send an internal notice to staff. Preserve all communications, notes, drafts, and call logs relating to the matter. Pause any auto-delete policies in relevant inboxes and workspaces. If witnesses or agencies are already under committee requests, reconfirm preservation with them. You don't just defend your member, you defend the integrity of the paper trail. If the sender later claims harassment or fabrication, your receipts are meticulous, chronological, and complete. Step 5. Response architecture. A strong reply isn't a victory lap. It's a surgical document with 4 moves. 1. State the privilege and jurisdictional defect up front for Category A-B statements. 2. Decline to debate protected legislative acts in any forum other than the committee. 3. As to any Category C statements, reject the premise, and if necessary, clarify with precise language anchored to public facts. 4. Put the sender on notice about preservation and any perceived attempts to chill a congressional proceeding. No chest beating, no adjectives. Precision is the flex. Step 6. The yes, no list for language. Yes. The statements cited on pages 2-4 were made during a duly convened oversight hearing and are protected legislative acts. Yes. To the extent your letter addresses public commentary, we disagree with your characterizations and refer you to the attached sources at tabs AF. No. We dare you to sue. No. Your client is corrupt and will be exposed. You're not auditioning for a clip. You're guarding the lane. Every sentence should either assert privilege, correct a record, or create accountability for future conduct. Step 7. Press strategy that honors the shield. The easiest way to puncture your own armor is to turn a hearing exchange into a media brawl. Draft a holding statement that says 3 things and nothing more. 1. Oversight continues. 2. Official statements are part of a protected legislative process. 3. Our office won't be deterred from asking questions about how public funds are spent. If reporters ask for spicy elaboration, redirect to released documents or the hearing transcript. The soundbite is process and receipts, not clapback. Step 8. Whistleblower lanes and safety. If the matter touches employees, contractors, or former staff who may have relevant information, restate in writing the proper channels for disclosures, IG hotlines, committee portals, protected counsel-to-counsel submissions. Make clear that retaliation against witnesses will be documented and referred. Quietly coordinate with committee security on staff safety if online swarms spike. Call logs, doxing attempts, coordinated harassment. Safety isn't theatrics. It's part of preserving a proceeding. Step 9. Coordination with institutional counsel. Don't freelance complicated constitutional arguments in public. The House Senate General Counsel has templates, precedents, and scars. Use them. If the sender's letter misstates law, confusing protected hearing remarks with campaign rhetoric, your reply can cite the distinction without litigating the hearing in the press. Where appropriate, loop in committee counsel so messaging stays aligned with the investigative plan. Step 10. Don't take the bait. Threat letters are designed to move the fight off the hill and into a court of public opinion where privilege is weaker and emotions run hot. Resist the pull. Keep the next substantive move inside the committee process. A follow-up document request, a transcribed interview, a hearing notice, a supplemental QFR. When power tries to turn oversight into a feud, answer with procedure. That contrast reads as calm, competent, and credible to both reporters and judges. Step 11. Timeline the story for yourself, not for clicks. Build a one-page chronology. Initial reporting or data anomaly, preliminary staff review, scope of inquiry approved, first hearing, threat letter arrives, preservation notices, response, next oversight step. This isn't for X. It's for your file and your sanity. It keeps your team aligned, helps new staff spin up in minutes, and ensures every external statement harmonizes with the actual sequence of events. Step 12. Measure twice, speak once. Before any post or presser, run a privilege check. Does this statement repeat or summarize protected hearing content in a way that could be construed as a new, unprotected assertion? If yes, pivot to process language, as reflected in the official hearing record dated date, and point to the transcript or exhibit rather than rephrasing it colorfully. The point is not to hide, it's to keep the most sensitive material anchored where your shield is strongest. Step 13. Anticipate escalation. If the sender replies with louder adjectives or tries to move the controversy into a friendly venue, let counsel handle it. Meanwhile, expand the oversight footprint where justified. Bring in the IG, request audits, consult GAO. Aggression often signals soft spots. Targeted follow-up signal you saw them. Each formal step you take converts noise into process, which is precisely where intimidation has the least oxygen. Step 14. Internal discipline. Remind the boss and comms. No off-the-cuff color commentary about parties or personalities. No victory memes, no dunking on air. The audience you actually care about, career reporters, institutional lawyers, and the public that pays for the contracts, reads restraint as strength. The goal is credibility, not catharsis. Finally, know what winning looks like. It isn't a viral ratio or a headline about a legal beatdown. Winning is uninterrupted oversight, documents produced, testimony taken, findings published, fixes implemented, funds clawed back if needed. You protect the privilege so the facts can do their work. The letter becomes a footnote, not a plot twist. In the next chapter, we'll zoom back out to the why, the tangible payoff of doing this the right way. We'll show how disciplined oversight translates into safer systems, smarter spending, and real recoveries, and why those outcomes matter far more than any week-long spectacle. Because at the end of the day, the story isn't the threat. The story is what your persistence uncovers, and what the public gains when the process is protected. Accountability doesn't sound dramatic until you see it on the balance sheet. It looks like billions redirected, unsafe practices corrected, subsidies clawed back, and contractors suddenly remembering how to meet deadlines when the spotlight shines. This is where the abstract fight over privilege and intimidation cashes out in the real world, outcomes that affect safety, budgets, and trust. When oversight is disciplined, the payoff is measurable. Start with contract integrity. Competitive bidding isn't a formality. It's the mechanism that keeps costs honest. When emergency modifications are abused, taxpayers often pay a premium without knowing it. Oversight that documents irregularities can trigger contract audits, suspension, or even termination. That means hundreds of millions return to Treasury or reallocated to higher priority programs. It also forces agencies to tighten their internal approval chains, so the next time urgency is invoked, the paperwork matches the reality. Contractors that once assumed emergency meant blank check learn that the margin for gamesmanship is gone. Now consider safety culture. Launches, vehicle production, network infrastructure. These aren't apps that can crash and reboot. They're high-risk systems where corners cut can cost lives. Oversight digs that reveal waived inspections or downgraded safety flags don't just embarrass vendors. They reset incentives. Agencies embarrassed by sunlight re-empower their safety officers. Companies under the microscope retrain crews, upgrade facilities, and bring compliance teams back into the loop. The result isn't a press release. It's fewer accidents, fewer cover-ups, and a culture that values proof over promises. Next is subsidy discipline. Tax credits and grants exist to accelerate public goals: clean energy, manufacturing jobs, innovation. But when a company claims credits for ineligible products or double dips across programs, every dollar misused is a dollar not serving its purpose. Oversight can expose those abuses, triggering IRS reviews, Department of Energy audits, or even state-level clawbacks. That's not abstract. It's refunds measured in millions flowing back to public coffers. The message to industry is blunt. Subsidies aren't free money, they're conditional trust. Break the trust, lose the money. Oversight also has a deterrent effect. When one high-profile probe reveals emails joking about easy government cash, it changes behavior far beyond the target company. General counsels across industries circulate the story internally. Don't let us be next. That ripple effect makes agencies harder to game and makes executives think twice before rolling dice with compliance. The deterrent value often dwarfs the initial case. It's the silent recalibration of dozens of firms that decide prevention is cheaper than investigation. Then there's policy feedback. Each oversight case provides real-world data about gaps in rules. If contract mods are being abused, Congress can legislate caps or enhanced reporting requirements. If subsidy fraud recurs, eligibility criteria can be tightened. If intimidation letters become a pattern, Congress can strengthen whistleblower protections or clarify witness tampering statutes. Oversight is the lab where law meets practice. Every investigation that exposes a loophole is also an opportunity to close it. The public payoff isn't just fiscal, it's confidence. Citizens who see lawmakers standing their ground against wealthy interests are reminded that the process isn't for sale. Investors who see contracts reviewed and subsidies audited gain assurance that markets aren't skewed by favoritism. Agency staff who see their cautious memos vindicated by hearings are emboldened to raise flags earlier next time. Confidence isn't a soft benefit. It's the grease that keeps democratic systems moving without constant cynicism clogging the gears. And remember, oversight wins aren't always splashy. They can be as small as a contractor refiling accurate reports, an agency adopting stricter review protocols, or a whistleblower getting safe passage to testify. Multiply those across dozens of cases, and you have systemic change. Each correction is a guardrail added to the road, making future crashes less likely. The flip side is cost of silence. When oversight is chilled by intimidation, waste metastasizes. Safety corners keep being cut, subsidies keep being siphoned, and the first time the public learns the truth is after a preventable disaster. That's the real reason intimidation must be resisted. Not because it offends pride, but because it robs the public of corrections that only sunlight can deliver. Every clawback delayed is millions lost. Every safety fix deferred is risk multiplied. In the end, accountability is the scoreboard. It tells you whether the months of hearings, document fights, and legal sparring produced tangible benefits. Did the taxpayer get money back? Did the systems get safer? Did the agencies improve controls? If the answer is yes, then the spectacle fades and the process stands tall. In the next section, we'll push further. What happens when accountability collides with public perception? How investors, markets, and political allies react when investigations trigger cascading consequences, and why the fallout often extends far beyond the initial dispute. Because the true power of oversight isn't just in recovering dollars, It's in reshaping how entire ecosystems behave when they realize someone is watching. Markets hate uncertainty, and nothing generates uncertainty like congressional oversight backed by evidence. One hearing clip can spook retail traders. One leaked response letter can shake institutional portfolios. Accountability doesn't stop at clawbacks or safer protocols. It radiates outward into stock charts, boardrooms, campaign offices, and even foreign capitals. This is where the story becomes a system shock. Start with investors. Big funds build positions on assumptions. Steady subsidies, predictable contracts, manageable regulatory risk. Oversight investigations destabilize those assumptions. A credible allegation of contract favoritism can lead analysts to downgrade a stock, not because they're sure penalties are coming, but because the risk premium just went up. That alone can shave billions off market capitalization overnight. If the oversight uncovers real violations, institutional investors may exit entirely to avoid being caught in a compliance dragnet. The signal is clear. Political risk isn't background noise. It's valuation material. Then there are corporate partners. Joint ventures, supply chains, and licensing deals depend on trust in the anchor company. If oversight reveals subsidy fraud or safety cover-ups, partners quietly review exit clauses. They don't wait for indictments. They prepare contingency plans. Contracts include termination for cause or morals clauses, and a single congressional report can activate those triggers. What began as a hill fight ends up as a renegotiated supply contract in Europe or a cancelled facility in Asia. The political class reacts too. Allies who once touted a company as a national champion grow cautious. Donations get returned, endorsements go silent. Even partisan defenders hesitate if the evidence pile is public and damning. For politicians, the cost-benefit flips. Defending a powerful donor is no longer an asset, it's a liability. This is why aggressive oversight often draws bipartisan cover once the facts hit daylight. Self-preservation pushes even reluctant actors to distance themselves, and don't ignore the regulators abroad. European competition authorities, Asian trade ministries, and global financial regulators watch U.S. oversight like hawks. If Congress uncovers subsidy abuse at home, expect Brussels to ask whether the same company manipulated programs overseas. If safety violations surface in Texas, Berlin will wonder about its own subsidy approvals. One investigation triggers a dozen more, each with their own penalties, delays, and reputational damage. The media ecosystem amplifies the fallout. Business press frames it as risk. Political press frames it as corruption. Tech press frames it as hubris. Each sector reaches its own audience, from hedge fund managers to mid-level engineers. That saturation ensures the story can't be quarantined. Even careful crisis PR struggles when the raw documents are already public exhibits. The evidence drives the narrative. Spin only slows the bleeding, markets react in patterns. Day 1, volatility spikes, shorts pile in. Day 2, analysts publish cautious notes, citing headline risk. Week 1, activist investors smell blood and demand governance changes. Quarter 1, if investigations expand, credit rating agencies adjust outlooks, raising borrowing costs. By the end of the fiscal year, what started as an oversight letter can morph into higher capital costs, smaller margins, and board-level turmoil. For executives, the psychology shifts. The confident posture of, "we can crush critics," gives way to, "we need to reassure stakeholders." That means compliance programs once treated as box-checking suddenly get budget. Internal auditors gain leverage. General counsels who warned about aggressive tactics are vindicated. In some cases, boards quietly trim executive power, limiting social media antics, tightening sign-off on government lobbying, or even exploring succession plans. The external oversight reshapes internal governance, and while corporate America recalibrates, ordinary citizens watch the spectacle and draw conclusions about fairness. They see that government contracts aren't untouchable, that subsidies come with strings, that billionaires can be questioned under oath. Public trust is fragile, but nothing restores it faster than proof that even the powerful must explain themselves. That restoration has knock-on effects: higher willingness to support funding for watchdogs, greater respect for congressional committees, and less cynicism about the possibility of reform. This cascading fallout is why oversight matters beyond the immediate case. A single confrontation doesn't just protect one budget line, it can reorder incentives across industries and recalibrate the behavior of actors who were never in the hearing room. The lesson spreads. Intimidation can boomerang, and scrutiny, once triggered, is contagious. In our next section, we'll drill into the legal battlefield that follows the political and market shocks. From whistleblower lawsuits to shareholder suits, from grand juries to inspector general referrals. Because once an intimidation attempt escalates into evidence on the record, the courtroom becomes the next arena, and the stakes shift from reputation to survival.